Okay, we finally have information from TEA about what exactly a high scoring extended constructed response essay will look like. So we are excited to break this down with you. This is an overview of the components that we found consistently in high scoring essays in both middle and in EOC tests. And we thought that it would be good to share the exact documents with you and review what we saw so that you can make decisions for your own students on how to go about teaching the extended constructed response for the purposes of STAR. So first off, you have the link to the scoring guide. It looks at the top like this, and a brief overview of the scoring guide is that TEA is giving us some fine print information about the rubrics, and you'll be able to see more about that in a second. TA pulled one English 1 reading passage and then included a short constructed response student samples and extended constructed response student samples for the same passage. So here is the passage that they're using to show us what's what in here. It is on page 4 of your document. Now would be a good time to pause and review what the passage is all about. So having read the passage, now we can do the brief overview of the rest of the scoring guide. Here is that short constructed response example that we were talking about earlier. TEA is writing item-specific rubrics. So here's the item-specific rubrics. And then most excitingly, TEA is including examples of zeros, ones, and twos. This is all affirming to the work we've already done and that we predicted. And we're not going to spend much time here on short constructed response guides because it was really the extended constructed response that we were really anticipating and needing clarification on. So here is the rubric that TEA has released. This is based off an informational prompt. You can see the prompt reads, explain how reading the journal leads Katie to remind herself to look for fireflies. This is informational in that the students aren't having to convince anybody of anything. They're just explaining an interpretation, right? Informational. But as we look into the rubric, again, we can see that this is totally different from the STAR essays of the past, in that students are expected to have evidence to support an interpretation of a text. It's an evidence-based writing question. The components, TEA breaks down the rubric into two parts, organization and development of ideas, that we see up here, for a total of 3 points for this part. And then later on, we'll see the other 2 points are provided through conventions and use of conventions. So as far as organization and development of ideas, some things to keep in mind is that the controlling idea, our thesis, must be there and must be clearly identifiable. Of course, in high school, we call this a thesis. TE is using the same rubric for both middle school and high school. They also ask that the organization be effective, and we also see that they are calling for an introduction and conclusion. And indeed, we noticed that the lower scoring essays did not have an introduction and conclusion, and TEA and their annotations called that out for a reason why those students were scored down. Also, as far as the essay develops, all the ideas must be appropriate, and they need to develop and continue to develop that controlling idea or thesis. Evidence. So this is what really makes these essays so different, is that students have to evaluate and select relevant text-based evidence that supports their controlling idea or thesis. And then another thing that we must keep in mind is that TEA is asking that all the evidence be explained, right? And that the evidence, here's the explained, and the evidence and the explanation both clearly support and develops the controlling idea or thesis. This is why we have so strongly suggested that we keep the reasoning part in CER writing there and ask students to continue to write reasoning. Yes, it's not necessary for the short constructed response as far as scoring goes, but it is this kind of nuanced skill that students need a lot of practice with, and it's an expectation on the extended constructed response essay. Finally, word choice is really important to keep expression of ideas clear and effective. So TEA is looking for understanding of the text through the use of the students' word choice in their interpretations and their writing about the essay. So all of that's really important. This calls to mind my understanding of AP literature and language writing, where a line of reasoning in the essay is really important. So when we think about the students developing that initial controlling idea or thesis and being able to support it throughout the essay and like really push that line of reasoning through, that's going to be something that we need to be thinking about and supporting students in doing. So we've got the organization and development of ideas. And I totally scrolled past it. Sorry. And we've got conventions. So to score the rest of the 5 points, the conventions, for 2 points, students need to have a consistent command of sentence construction, punctuation, capitalization, grammar, and spelling. But please note, that doesn't mean they have to be perfect. They can have a few errors as long as those errors do not impact the clarity of the writing. And we saw some issues on the 5s. Nothing significant that would make me be like, what are you trying to say, student? So that is the rubric in a nutshell. At this point, you can see that TEA has examples of zeros, examples of ones, and so on. We thought it would be most useful, though, to zero in on the examples of the 5s. This is the first one here. You can see that it's, as far as length, it's nothing to be too scared about. And it has all the components that we're going to talk about in a minute. We liked this as the second 5 example better because it's more organized and it's a better model to teach students and to show students explicitly how all these essay components should be working together. So this is the essay that we're going to be working through on this deep dive of the scoring guide. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we use Kami to support some annotations that we were doing and labeling and highlighting. It's great, and I think it helps kind of clarify the pieces. So reminder of the prompt. The prompt for this essay is explain how reading the journal leads Katie to remind herself to look for fireflies. This is a very interesting prompt. The other ECR prompts that we've been seeing are much more about genre characteristics and author's craft choices, but this shows us that sometimes TEA will just ask students to talk about the ideas in a text. This one specifically about the cause-effect relationship of Katie reading her grandmother's journal, which is like the majority of the text is, as you recall, like the grandmother's words in the journal and the effect that reading has on Katie herself. So the kids need to be able to have some kind of understanding and then write a thesis that explains how the journal affected Katie to where she now wants to remind herself to look for fireflies. Okay, so digging in, we see first that there's an introductory paragraph here. And we read these first 3 sentences or so, and we were really thinking, what is this student doing here? And it became clear to us that this was offering a synopsis, which much good writing does, right? It kind of gives you an overview of what the topic is. Here, this student is giving us an overview of what is happening in the text. So the student writer writes, in this excerpt from Tending Roses, Katie visits her grandmother and stumbles upon a peculiar journal. She reads quite a beautiful entry of hers regarding fireflies. Doing so, Katie herself has been metaphorically called to continue looking for them. It's beautiful, right? And so here we can see, when we look at what a synopsis is, it's just a brief summary which gives readers an overview of the text or the part of the text discussed. And we can see how that could be helpful, right? It's like a summary. This is what the text was about. And then what leads up, the synopsis leads up into the thesis. So the writer closes out this paragraph with her controlling idea or thesis, Katie has been reminded that taking a break once in a while from work to look around one's amazing surroundings can be really rewarding as you soak in the relaxing beauty of it all. So this thesis was called out and named by TEA. You can read their annotations down here. Here it is. Katie has been reminded. And it also creates an end to this introductory paragraph. So when we're thinking about how to teach into having an introduction, having that paragraph, we can see that these two components work really well. Synopsis, end with your thesis. It's going to support that explicit, like these are the things we should be writing for. I'm going to model this for you in my own writing as a teacher, and then I'm going to be expecting you to have this in the essay. Of course, there's lots of other ways to have to develop introductions, right? But we feel like this is a good safe bet, and we know students can do well on these components of an introduction for an essay. Then we move into body paragraphs. So just to set a little bit of context here, we have been working so hard on claims, evidence, and reasoning, right? What we notice about this essay is that each body paragraph replicated that kind of structure with a little bit of movement across the components, right? Another thing to think about is the students have to create an overarching thesis, which we see in this top green right here. And to have clarity in the body paragraphs, it's supportive to have topic sentences or example statements that support that thesis. So, in a manner of speaking, these example statements that you're seeing at the top, here's one here, and then here's one here in the body paragraphs, are serving as the overarching essays claims, like the CER component within a body paragraph. And so just to give us context, when we're talking about example statements, we're saying that example statements are serve to offer an example of the student's thesis. They're a claim that supports the thesis. So if this student writer is saying Katie has been reminded that taking a break once in a while is important and it's good, then this is one example of how reading her grandmother's journal supports that reaction. I'll read it. From paragraphs 5 to 10, Katie's grandmother expresses her sadness of when she missed the firefly's departure from her home. So this is one way that Katie's reading of the journal sparks that change and makes her want to read fireflies. And the writer does a great job of making that clear as the first sentence of the first body paragraph. Then moving on, she writes, as the creatures left, she awakened to the fact that she had not really appreciated nor noticed them for some time now. We thought this was some more synopsis. It's kind of moving the narrative forward and giving you a little summary of what's happening before the student moves into her explicit textual evidence. And you see that in blue. The quote, I suppose they flew away one night as I lingered over mending or soiled tableware or a child's lessons. They flew away while my head was bent to task and took no time to bid goodbye, showcases this sentiment. So, right, some evidence that supports this example or this claim in this body paragraph. And then here we have her reasoning. TEA calls reasoning explanation. We're calling it reasoning just to support students with that transfer of CER. So here she is explaining the quote. She was too busy with chores, family, and life in general. Katie's grandmother had been constantly working so much that she rushed right past the wonders of nature around her. And that certainly does explain the quote. It provides an interpretation. It's kind of like, this is what the quote is telling me. This is what the quote is making me think. And that's just a nice little chunk of CER academic writing, one body paragraph, right? Our kids can do this. Into the second body paragraph, the student provides a transitional sentence. And the transitional sentence is actually working to move the reader along in chronological order of the essay. So nice choice by this writer. As she realizes this, she recalls memories of the past when she would see all the plants and animals by her farm. And then this leads into our second example statement here. So again, it's another claim that supports the thesis at the top of the essay. Katie's grandmother longs to experience this dearly once again, and even more as she sees her own kids living the same thing as she had done so before. Then we have the evidence to support that example statement. The quote, I thought of how many times as a girl I stared into the faraway moon and dreamed impossible dreams, wishing for the same treasures I heard my children ask for when I passed their doors at night, demonstrates this. And then the reasoning or explanation of that quote. Nostalgia is a lovely feeling with a sense of depression and desire for what was. The natural and imaginative spirit that young ones have allow them to observe what adults like Katie's grandmother simply can or will not let themselves do. This is where she recognizes the other half of the emotion, the part that shows what can be. So, some nice interpretation there by the student. We end with the conclusion. To conclude, Katie was reminded of the importance in dropping responsibilities for a quick second and admire the world as her grandmother's poetic journal entry entails. It is hard to truly live life if they walk by the small, unnoticed beauties that will make it all up. The little things are those that really bring joy and meaning. Children know that, and one who is older used to as well. So now Katie has seen what she must keep on looking for, those fireflies in her life. We go back to our components list. And thinking back to those two body paragraphs that we read, we saw that there were example statements, right, that were acting as the topic sentences of the paragraphs, acting as the claims that support the thesis at the top. We saw textual evidence that was in quotation form. We noticed that in some of the lower scoring essays, students who paraphrased sometimes did it incorrectly, and TEA called them out and scored them lower for that. So we still think that having quotations is the best, most efficient way of getting that high score and getting the points for the textual evidence. And then reasoning statements, those examples of the students explaining how the evidence supports their example statement and, of course, their thesis. And finally, that nice conclusion essay, our conclusion paragraph that reinforces the controlling idea. And there was some takeaway or insight there too. So that, of course, was 5. We know that students will be at varying degrees of being able to write at that proficiency. However, we do feel very strongly that every single one of our students can learn how to have these components in an essay and be able to carry that extended constructed response. It would be great to go back and read these student samples and the TEA annotations on your own. It's really a nice way of seeing exactly what our scores are going to be looking for so that we can give students the best chance of doing well, because we know what the target is and we know how to plan our lessons in writing. We know what to model so that students do well and have awesome learning outcomes.